I felt it was important that we see Maylard, and I felt it was important that we see Antipops, because even though he doesn't have a large part in the story of that episode, if you're watching this right after watching the end of season 8, you're going to wonder what's going on with Antipops. So it's like we got to make it clear, and then going through and picking out which regular show characters are there in this happy afterlife, like that was like a it took a good amount of time and energy to kind of make those choices and figure those things out.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another regular show wiki interview. Today's guest originally joined the show as a storyboard artist for seasons 3 to 7 and has since returned for regular show The Lost Tapes, where he is the supervising director. You may also recognize him as the voice of the cart. Please welcome Toby Jones.
Hello, thanks for having me. Yes, the cart, perhaps my greatest and grandest contribution to the show, perhaps.
Your magnum opus.
hmm
Well, one thing I do want to quickly ask that I've been really curious about for a long time, just before I get into the regular set of questions. The episode Cruisin, your name is credited for it, but I don't think you boarded on it.
That's news to me because I know I did not work on that episode. I can tell you what was going on with that is I joined the show while that episode was being worked on. So they were like, they were having trouble finding people, and Benton and Calvin were kind of running double duty on a couple of episodes. So when I arrived, they were trying to finish Cruisin' quickly so they could move on to episodes with me and Hillary Florido because we were both joining the show at the exact same time. And so I was sitting there in Calvin's office with Calvin while he was working on Cruisin'. And while they were finishing up Cruisin', I was sitting there doing revisions. Actually, I think they were like fake revisions on episodes where it's just like as a task, it's like for this week, just like go over these rough boards and do just like to like learn to draw the characters, learn to draw the show, stuff like that. So no, I did not work on Cruisin' in any tangible way at all. So if I'm credited on that episode, that would be a mistake. But I had a front row seat to every moment of it.
I assume so because I remember a few years back, like after the show had ended, you started doing like these series of tweets talking about like each episode I did, and the first one was Under the Hood, and I was like, wait, was it Under the Hood? That's great. We can remove that from the wiki now.
Yeah, and that's also interesting because again, I was sharing an office with Kelvin, who was going to be my main board partner, but I think that they were finishing up those episodes. And actually, now that I remember this, they were finishing up Cruisin', and while they were doing that, Drace and I did Under the Hood. And so Drace was technically my first board partner, and I learned a lot from him. And yeah, and we did that one in like a truncated amount of time before then everybody was doing episodes on weird schedules, and then me and Hillary kicking off with Benson and Calvin respectively kind of got everybody on a back on a normal schedule. But so we came in during kind of a chaotic time on the show in season 3.
We'll get into our main set of questions now. I just want to ask, like, going back, what's the initial thing that really got you interested in animation and film?
That's a great question. I think that I always was just an obsessive fan of art, be it cartoons or movies or music or video games or whatever. And I think that what kind of happened was that I was a bad student in school. I was terrible, and I was terrible at pretty much any task that I didn't actively want to do. And something that I found that I had almost an infinite energy for was creating stuff. So, I would be terrible in school, but I would be cranking out comics every single day. And on the weekends, I'd be making, local access shows with friends. And so that's something I did have an endless reservoir of energy and enthusiasm for. And so it kind of became a thing of like, well, it would probably be a good idea to make that be what I kind of make the focus of my life, if possible. So that was kind of the initial spark of like, oh, there's this thing that I love and this thing that I enjoy doing. And so if there's a way to make that be something I can get paid to do, that would really be ideal, I think, for pretty much everybody involved.
And so, how did that all kind of lead up to you entering the industry? I know regular show was your first job.
Well, I went to college for film, for live action film. That was my main focus. And I was making these short films and trying to build up these features that were like gag comedies kind of in the style of what would become, AJ Goes to the Dog Park, which is my independent movie that I made a couple years ago. Stuff kind of inspired by Zucker Abrams Zucker or David Wayne movies, stuff like that. These silly, absurdist gag comedies and stuff. And that's what I was kind of trying to work on doing. And I was also making comics. I was making like autobiographical comics about how much of a pathetic loser I was and how much my life sucked. Uh, and those are the kind of two primary things that I was working on. I wasn't really exploring the possibility of working in animation because I didn't think I necessarily had the technical skill set. At the time, I didn't know what the jobs were. I didn't know that there would possibly be a place for me in the industry. So I graduated from college. I went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which is where Owen Dennis and Maddie Careypell also went, and Nick Bachman, who worked on Lost Tapes. And I was trying to get movies made, but the thing with movies are they cost a lot of money to make. So I was like submitting for grants and stuff, and nobody wanted to give me money for anything. And one thing I was doing was making comics. So I was working day jobs. I was working at a bakery and working at a movie theater in Minneapolis. And I was working these day jobs, and I'd get home and I'd work on comics and movies. And I was getting a little bit of attention with my comics, not a lot, just like within the world of like zines. A few people were starting to kind of react positively to my comics, so that was cool. And then I discovered Adventure Time and Regular Show. They started airing, and for me, as someone who just graduated college into a recession and was facing a pretty miserable job prospects, it was really, really inspiring to see this beacon of like raw creativity on TV, And so like I would have like my girlfriend Maddie like record episodes for me on VHS while I was working a night shift at the movie theater or something. And so these shows were this huge inspiration to me. And I discovered through following the shows that there exists this writer slash board artist position. And I was seeing what that work looked like. Then I was like, okay, well, I'm not the world's greatest, technical draftsman, but like I'm a decent cartoonist and I'm a funny writer. So maybe the combination of those skills that I gained in both filmmaking and comic art could maybe apply to this. And it just happened that around that time, and I've told the story many times because it's such a strange story in a way. But around that time, I had just followed JG on Twitter, and he just made this tweet, and it just said, "We're looking for board artists on Regular Show. We need more board artists." So I just immediately like found a way to contact him. I DM'd him on Facebook. And I was like, "Hey, love the show. Here's some of my comics and some of my short films." I just took a shot, you know. And he sent me a storyboard test, I know you've heard probably quite a bit about the storyboard test on Regular Show. And I got that, and I remember I worked on it like day in and day out. Like I was like, "This is my shot." And so I just like locked myself in like the cellar of the house I was sharing with my friends after college. And I just like grinded on this board test, trying to make it as funny as possible. And I would like refer to friends. I'd be like, "What do you think? Is this funny?" And they would like help me out and we go over it. And the thing about that board test was it looks insane because I didn't know how to draw the characters or board the show. It's a disaster to look at, but it was pretty funny. And so, I submitted that board test and I didn't really think anything would come of it. I just want to put my best foot forward. I remember talking to friends and while I was working on it, because I had friends visiting from out of town at the time, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I have to go in the other room for like 6 hours and work on this test every day." And then my friends were like, "Man, are you really going to move to LA if you get this job on Regular Show?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to get the job. Why would they hire me? I have no experience in animation. Um, but if I did, then sure, yeah, I'll move out to LA to make cartoons, of course." And then, yeah, a few weeks later, I got the job. So a few weeks later, I shoved my mattress into my car and drove across the country to work on Regular Show. And the thing at the time was, of course, as you know, as a fan of these things, they have a pretty specific sensibility. And Adventure Time and Regular Show and a lot of those board-driven shows like Steven Universe and even KO, it's hard to find somebody who can speak in the voice of the show and bring their own creative voice to it as well that's like compatible with the show. And so a lot of those shows were bringing on people with a comic artist background because it was someone that they knew that could write the show. And so when I joined the show, I had to learn every single thing about what it means to be a board artist when it comes to drawing it. But luckily, I was able to make it funny from the beginning. That was the thing that they found hardest to find. The way that mine was okay. The image in this prompt is Mordecai and Rigby are walking toward Benson, and they're leaving footprints, and they're really excited to say something to Benson. Benson looks concerned, and as you know, the way it is, it's the same image on two pages, and you do a funny gag, you fill in their word balloon, and then the next page you do it again. It just says now make it funnier, and it's the exact same image. So the first one, Mordecai and Rigby are walking over to Benson, and they say party at Blood Lake, and then the second one they run up and they say tragedy at Blood Lake. So, it's a classic like joke about a joke where it's like my way of making it funnier is to make it darker and kind of almost make a joke about the fact that it is a joke. And that served me well. I was pretty proud of that one. My board test is full of all kinds of interesting stuff because the sample they gave at that time was a scene from the episode Over the Top. And the episode hadn't aired yet, but it was like this one blurb from Over the Top. So I boarded a scene from that episode for that. And I remember I tried to find a good proportion between what I knew was the voice of the show and kind of my own unique sensibility to kind of show like that as well. And so I remember I did this joke where like Rigby beats Skips at arm wrestling, and then he's like, Mordecai, bring me my hat. And Mordecai brings up a briefcase and opens up the hat, and it has a hat that says stronger than Skips. And he puts the hat on. It's like he's been waiting to wear this hat the whole time. So just like something on the more absurdist, like gag level, just to kind of be like, okay, I'm doing the voices of the characters relatively in character. And then here's like an example of ways that I can maybe push with my own voice a little bit as well. It's like a 70-30 proportion.
Let's get on to your first episode a bit more under the hood. It's an episode which I know you've talked about in the past, like it's a bit hard to watch.
Yeah, yeah, because I had no idea what I was doing at that time, and so I was really, really just trying my best. And because I was learning on the job how to storyboard for television, it was just very challenging. And I think we cranked that episode out in 3 weeks. To what I said about the schedule earlier. And at that time, we were doing everything on paper. I mean, that whole show, we were doing everything on paper, and we were trying to clean everything up on these big, we Xerox the Post-its to be bigger, and then it's this big, like, so a lot of these lavish pencil drawings, and I just didn't know how to do the job yet. And Drace did a good job, like training me in on the voice of the show. And then also one thing that was happening was like, I sat down with like JG and John Infantino and Mike Roth, and they went through the board panel by panel and just like told me exactly what needed to be done to make it the show, to make it work as the show. But I think that there's not a lot of my personal comedic voice in that episode, and a lot of I feel my drawings and staging are pretty weak, so that's why it's kind of like not my favorite thing to look back on. I think it has some funny moments. I think Drace's stuff is amazing in that episode, but yeah, I think it's very much just like a very tentative step for my first episode.
I feel like back in the day, I'm sure you'll probably remember because I know you were quite active online within the regular show community. I know there are a lot of people going on about Muscle Man is appearing too much and whatever, but I, for one, no, I really love seeing, especially the progression of him, because at the beginning he's just like a real jerk to Mordecai and Rigby. I love just seeing that very gradual progression of him being like kind of cooler. And there's a lot of great Muscle Man stuff in that episode that I really love.
I agree. That was some of my favorite stuff to do in that episode. And I do remember though, because like I even was feeling it right away in season 3 when I was working on it, because I think they were discovering Muscle Man comedically, especially at around that time. And so there were a good number of Muscle Man episodes. And the thing about doing these 40 episode seasons is that like you don't necessarily have the luxury of like spreading stuff out in a really thoughtful way over a season. You got to take the ideas as they come to you. If a story's working, like it's got to go through. And so there was like a pocket of Muscle Man episodes where it's like, oh yeah, it might have been nicer if they were spread out over the course of the season. They were all good episodes, but I do remember like because I had gotten that one and I'd gotten Trucker Hall of Fame, which I think is a really really good episode, and then Dead at Eight. Oh, and then I did Fancy Restaurant, and I remember kind of saying like, I'd love to do like a Benson episode or something. Like that would be a lot of fun. But one thing about Muscle Man is like a lot of these characters, I've really grown to love working with them. And Muscle Man in particular, because he's a character where he can say virtually any joke. He's like Homer Simpson. He can say the dumbest thing in the world, or he could say the smartest thing in the world, and both will equally be in character for him. So he's an extremely useful comedic tool. So I love Muscle Man.
There's another thing. I don't know if you ever delved into the regular show comics.
Very little, very little.
Basically, there's an issue, one of the very earliest issues. The entire story is it's basically a sequel to Under the Hood. Park Avenue comes back for revenge on the guys, but the guys have all gone to the beach, and for some reason, Benson's left Thomas in charge of the park.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like a really good premise for an episode, in my opinion. So I'll have to find that one.
Obviously, I'm not going to start going down the rabbit hole of expanded media. That's one of my favorite things is like connecting it to actual episodes. And I feel like there is, we'll get onto the Lost Tapes soon, but I feel like there is also an element of that with the new series as well, trying to figure out where everything slots in with the original series.
And well, I think that you probably as a fan, every single episode, that's kind of like a weird question you're forced to ask with every single episode because a lot of the episodes only will imply what part of the timeline they're taking part in. So I hope that's a fun like little like extra thing with these episodes for a viewer.
You got quite a lot of half-hour specials to work on in the original series. Obviously, Exit 9B is a huge episode. I can remember watching it for the first time. I feel like somebody posted it on YouTube because here in the UK we got episodes much later. So that was like my first exposure to that. But I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. So just like kind of what are your memories of working on that episode?
Well, I mean, yeah, I really felt the weight of trying to rise to the occasion when we got the first like full length half hour special. We had done Terror Tales before that. And that was the first one we did in season four. And again, I spent most of season three, I felt like just really getting my bearings and figuring out how to do the show because there's this like alchemy between your own creative voice and the creative voice of the show. And it takes time to find the perfect type of joke that works for both, you know. And I spent a lot of season three figuring that out and figuring out how to draw the show. I feel like I hit a nice sweet spot on best VHS in the world. That one finally it felt a little bit less like overwhelmingly challenging. And then the next one after that was Exit 9B. And what I will say about it that I remember is just how fun it was collaborating with Drace and Calvin and Maddie going through that outline. Just like combing through the outline, trying to find ways to plus up all the moments, make them as funny and interesting and weird and surprising and epic as possible. And it was a very collaborative type of experience. Now, I think that a lot of the moments that you probably remember as being the like truly incredible moments, those were a lot of that were Calvin and Drace, because Maddie and I were still pretty green at the time. But it was amazing being along for the ride and having a part in it. And you know, all these little moments throughout the episode were all things. That's one thing that's really fun about working on these 22s is that you get two board teams together and it's like a little mini writer's room where you really like to go through with a fine-tooth comb and agree upon how you want to like tell this story. And so that was my first taste of doing that. And yeah, I just felt like a ton of pressure. You know, I ended up because I was still relatively green at the time. A lot of the scenes I boarded were some of the simpler scenes, some of the more like connective tissue type scenes. But it was a ton of fun and super exciting at the time.
I remember Calvin posted a video, I think on Tumblr, and it was just a 360 of the pitch room, completely covered in post-its, and it's just like incredible.
Yep, and that wasn't even the longest one we ended up doing. You know, that's the funny thing. Like I remember the Thanksgiving special was even longer, the original version. And so that was that, but I love doing those 22-minute specials. They're just like so much fun.
Another one which it's quite interesting hearing about how it came about was Brilliant Century Duck Crisis special. Because am I right in thinking that was originally just going to be another 11-minute episode?
Correct. That's one of my favorite ones that I worked on. And yeah, Owen and I we got this outline, and it was a normal 11-minute episode. And because okay, when I started working on the show, the first couple of weeks I spent a lot of time on the server catching up on the new episodes that hadn't come out yet. And so I read the storyboard for a bunch of baby ducks, you know, before it aired. And I was like, this is one of the funniest episodes of the show. And so when Calvin and I got a bunch of full-grown geese, like we really tried to push the envelope and make it the best episode it possibly could be and keep on upping the ante. So a couple years later, I really felt like if we're going to make this episode, it needs to really escalate from what we did on a bunch of full-grown geese. And so Owen and I, we had kind of a tendency to get overly ambitious. And we just decided to add twice as many, three times as many transformations of these characters as what was in the original outline. We added all the stuff where like the geese monster transforms into the moon, the stuff with like Andy, the long lost brother, like so much stuff we added, and we just like kept it a secret from JG. We were just like we're just gonna like surprise them with like all this stuff that we've added, and it got to the point where the pitch was like unbelievably long for what was supposed to be an 11. And I thought like this could still be an 11 maybe. And a few weeks later they call us and they're like, or they come to our office and they're like, we're going to make it into a 22. We cannot cut this down to 11 and keep what's so funny about it. And so what happened actually was that they assigned us to further embellish the episode to make it feel more like a 22 and feel a bit more substantial. So we got handed like a list of scene concepts, and we were asked to board a bunch of additional scenes to the episode to add some connective tissue. There's some stuff at the beginning to give a little bit more build up. We fleshed out like Benson's arc throughout the episode. And yeah, so it ended up becoming a 22, which is a pretty rare thing. Normally you have your episodes pretty well earmarked in advance. But that was one where like if you think about like, I talked a lot about the early episodes where I was kind of getting my bearings and kind of finding my voice. Something like Brilliant Century Duck Crisis is very much the opposite end of the spectrum, where I feel so comfortable with Owen in our voices in the show that we feel emboldened to really, really, really escalate things from what is expected from us.
Like on the topic of half-hour specials, of course, your last episode on the original series was Rigby's graduation day. What was the vibe sort of like going into that, being like, this is my last board?
Well, because yeah, I did know it was my last board. I knew that right after that I'd be going to work on OKKO. And so it did feel a little bit like a graduation. It's cheesy to say, but of my own, where it's like this is like my final project or my final test. I've been on the show for 5 years at that time, and it was like my 40th episode. And getting to work with Owen and I got to work with Ryan and Minty again. It was the same team that had done the Dome Experiment special earlier that year. And the four of us getting together was some of the most fun that I ever had working on the show. And so, yeah, we just tried to stack it with as much funny stuff as we possibly could and as much heart as we could. Like that ending speech that Rigby does. Like, Minty did a great job with that scene, and I remember sitting with her, all of us together, just like figuring out how would Rigby say what he's gone through? How would he explain it? And his whole thing about like, you know, being supported by all these amazing people and all that stuff. It kind of relates a little bit to what it's like to, work on a team with with people like those. And so I had a wonderful, I mean, that's one of my favorite episodes that I've done. And I like that it's like it's a character driven 22, it's not a big action epic.
Yeah.
I like that it's that's one of my favorite things about the Rigby storyline. I think the Rigby storyline in season 7 is one of my favorite things in the show. And so yeah, that was one of the most positive experiences that I had. Just coming up with weird stuff like, oh, maybe the concept of the reality show is that everyone cries and dances. Weird stuff like that. And by that point, we were so comfortable, and JG and everybody were so comfortable with what we did, that we were able to really kind of express ourselves creatively. And so that's definitely one of my all-time favorite episodes.
Yeah, I've said when people are asking, like, oh, what's your favorite regular show special? In my mind, I'm always going straight to, I mean, obviously, there's the finale. Rigby's graduation day special is like, I think it's just naturally, like you say, it's also one of my favorites.
And it's also very like melancholy at times. This whole thing with Mordecai dealing with the fact that he like is having problems with the fact that his friend is like growing as a person. Like it's a very bittersweet, melancholy thing that I feel like rarely does a show that is ostensibly for children, rarely does a show like that have the opportunity to tell such like a nuanced, emotional, like mature story. So I'm very proud of that one.
Another episode which can't go unmentioned is Last Laserdisc Player, which you were also nominated for an Emmy for.
Hmm.
I have a strange question for this one. Uh, Whose side do you want? Who do you think is the superior format?
Between VHS and Laserdisc?
Any of the formats?
God, I mean, look, this is a boring answer. I have a major fondness for VHS, but my favorite way to watch a VHS is a pristine scan on a Blu-ray release with a bunch of extra features. So I'm probably going to go with Blu-ray as far as my favorite physical media, aside from, of course, 35 millimeter film, because who doesn't love going to see a film on 35 millimeter? So yeah, I think that I like Blu-ray. I like watching VHS on Blu-ray is my very strange answer to that question.
And that also feels like a very regular show answer.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, the show, yeah, with physical media, it's a major part of it. So, and the obsession with VHS culture and how to keep it alive and all that stuff. So, I suppose it is, yeah.
I mean, speaking of that, I've been kind of working on making my own regular show VHS tapes, similar to like the ones. What I did, that's what I did yesterday. I managed to get the whole of season one onto a tape.
Amazing.
I've only got like 200 odd episodes left.
Yeah, you could make the massive lost tape style giant like set of them.
I mean, I need to get like a giant fanny pack.
Yeah, exactly. Owen, I think, made a VHS of season one of Infinity Train as a gift for the crew, and he lavished a lot of attention in the cardboard artwork. And I think he may have actually even manually pan and scanned the entire show. So that's dedication.
Well, that's what I've done for these tapes. I've like been re-editing them so they're not squash and so they don't have letterbox.
I love that. I love that. That's great. Are you adding trailers and stuff to the beginning?
Not at the beginning, but like
Mhm.
at the end of the tapes, I'm putting like special features that are related. So like I've got like for season one, the Knife Men of Lollyland and Two in the AM PM, which I don't think would ever be on an official regular show release.
Right.
Another half hour special, the Thanksgiving special. Um, for some reason, I used to email Cartoon Network in the UK as like a 12-year-old kid, and I emailed them to be like, so are we still getting the Thanksgiving special? Because here in the UK, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Um, we still got, for some reason, we still got it like on Thanksgiving, on the week of Thanksgiving.
Great.
Um, but at that point, it was like, I think we were very late into season five. The order which episodes aired was very weird over here. The whole like Mordecai, Margaret, and CJ love triangle was completely messed up.
It's funny because it's harder to change the order than it is to just stick with the order, but everybody has their reasons, I guess.
They wanted to hold off on Merry Christmas Mordecai because it's a Christmas episode. But then we still got White Elephant gift exchange like in September.
No, that's incredibly strange.
Yeah, so just like what are your memories of the Thanksgiving episode?
I mean, that one was one of the harder ones of all of the specials that I did because there are so many running story threads going on at the same time. That's the main thing I remember is that we were kind of juggling because each set of characters kind of has their own little adventure that they're on, and it all kind of comes together at the end. So I would say of the 22s that I worked on, it's maybe the one that I found to be I still like it a lot, but I like a lot of the other ones maybe more. Um, and I same deal though. We got together as a group and like all pitched on jokes and everything. I remember when it was suggested that we model the villain off of Donald Trump. I remember at the time being like, Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know. Isn't that kind of a bit of an old reference, isn't it? Little did I know what was going to happen. So that makes it a very unique episode as well because of what we do there, which we made it quite funny at the very least. Um, but yeah, I like the sincerity of that episode. It's a thing where it's like regular show is can be a very sarcastic show. It can be kind of dark or whatever. But this is like a weirdly sweet, positive episode about the power and beauty of Thanksgiving and togetherness. And we just pushed that, and very strange at times with like the song with like the big concert at the end. I love that song though. So yeah, it was a challenge, and the main thing I do remember was the episode was so long that we tried. There was an attempt to convince the network to let it be a 44-minute special or even a 33-minute special, and we held a screening with the network of the full animatic in an attempt to ask to like let us please make it even longer because there was so much stuff. And unfortunately, it did still have to be a 22. It's probably for the best, but a lot of stuff got cut. I wish I could remember specifically what the scenes were, but tons of stuff had to go in order to make it fit into a 22. It was a very ambitious structure for an episode.
We're kind of talking about things that have been cut. Are there any other jokes or stuff that you put into episodes that didn't make it to the final product? I know that there were a few storyboards which you'd posted online back in the day where there's some fun extra stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's a constant on the show because you're always pushing the boundaries a little bit of like how weird can I get with these jokes. And so every single time, I remember on we were boarding on paper, we had these thumbnail pages, and every time a joke got cut at the thumbnail or crew pitch stage, I would put those cut jokes in a pile, and the pile would just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I had this huge stack of just cut jokes, and I wish I had it on hand to like point out like exactly some of my favorite ones. One that comes off on the top of my head is the episode "Lift with Your Back." We had a lot of fun writing this character Manny, whose whole thing is that he is cruel to Rigby, but he loves Rigby. He's always like, "You're the worst worker I've ever had, and you're like a son to me." Stuff like that. Like he loves Rigby. And so there was in the final episode, Rigby leaves, he quits the job, and then Manny goes, "You'll be back," or whatever. And then in the original board, he turns to walk away, and then he sees a human guy who looks like Rigby. And he like lights up. He's just like, "Oh my God, another Rigby." And I forget if he like offers him a job or something like that. But I think it was just a little too strange in that moment to have a human Rigby pop up in the middle of the episode. So that's one that comes to mind.
I'm very curious to know what that human Rigby would have looked like now.
It didn't look that different from like the humanoid Rigby in those promos that are being put out right now. It's just a dude with some brown hair and striped hoodie and stuff like that. And of course, there's another humanoid Rigby in that scene in the Dome Experiment special where Benson is in like the like fake dome or the fake like representation of the looks a little bit like that too. Just like some guy in his 20s who looks kind of like Rigby.
A little bit terrifying.
That was one of my favorite scenes to board. Yeah, all the weird ways that and again, that also kind of predicts a little bit what happened in his promos and stuff like that. But that was fun. That was a lot of fun to do.
Another thing I'm curious about on things that didn't make it to the final product, are there any, because obviously regular show is quite synonymous with using licensed music.
Hmm.
Are there any songs you wanted to get into any of your episodes, or even for the episodes that have come out so far in the Lost Tapes, any music that you wanted to get in but couldn't?
Well, I'll give you an example from the aforementioned episode "Lift with Your Back." I think in the final version, it's a sound-alike of "Back in Black" that plays during the montage. But what actually happened was that Owen produced a version of "Back in Black" with updated lyrics, "Back in Back," and he did a cover of it, and it's him screaming, trying to do the AC/DC thing, and he composed a parody of Back in Black called "Back in Back" with stuff about a back, and it was hilarious. So I don't know what happened there. I don't know if they tried to do it or what. But that's definitely of any song that I wish could have been in an actual episode. It definitely would have been "Back in Back" from Live with Your Back.
I always got the vibe that like, oh, maybe that was one of the songs, like maybe that was used as a temp track.
You can often tell. Yeah, you can often tell. Mutado does a really good job with kind of like sound alikes and stuff. So usually, if there was a song that was there before, sometimes you can maybe gleam an assumption from what the final score
Yeah,
sounds like.
there is one example of that, I think, in the Lost Tapes so far. And it was
Hmm.
like as it came on, I could hear like the lyrics of the actual song playing in my head.
Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah. Because there are a couple, we front load with these licensed songs and lost tapes. Although one thing I have to call out, not to get too ahead of ourselves with lost tapes, is the original composition of the Boba song from Boba or Bo Bust is one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. I think it's so funny.
I mean, thank you and to everybody else that works on the show because that has been stuck in my head since
Yeah.
that episode came out.
Look, and I wasn't even involved with that part of the production. And so when I watched it, I remember I texted Sean and I was just like, that is the funniest thing. And he was just like, thank you very much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. He said that I think he remarked that he got like a million vocal takes from the vocalist to get it exactly right or something like that. Because it's like, look, when it comes to making something the right level of stupid, you really, really have to commit like that. So yeah, I think it's rare you get like an original vocal track like that in regular show. So it sticks out and it makes the episode even funnier.
We have spoken to John and Roth and Albert Fox,
Oh,
um,
cool.
and I did ask them about doing a soundtrack because I felt obligated to.
Yeah.
Um, the answer was just sort of like, it's up to Cartoon Network.
I think that yeah, it's hard asking permission for things. It's a massive corporation. On OKKO, the composers they were just like, we're just going to dump these on SoundCloud if people want them. We can't sell them, but we'll just release them so people have access to them, because the music that gets made for these shows is so amazing, and it tends to be an uphill battle trying to get things like that to happen. So hopefully someday.
Hopefully, one day we can get.
I hope so. There's a market for it.
I'm curious to know if there are anything, if there was anything from your own personal life, and this can even go into Lost Tapes now that you are working as a writer. Anything that you've put into these episodes from your own life?
I mean, that is very much a constant. Let me like look at the list of Lost Tapes episodes that have been released. Because the thing with that show, that was the one time that I was in the writer's room. Um, and so a lot of being in the writer's room is coming in on a Monday and being like, here's something that happened over the weekend. And then a lot of times that type of thing becomes a story. And so there are several examples of that, but I just don't know if they're ones that have aired yet. I'm looking at it here. Well, Blade Games comes from real life in that I'm obsessed with something called Blade Sports. I came in early on with wanting to talk about blade sports, which is this thing that's exactly what it looks like. It's dudes in their garages doing a gauntlet of blade-based challenges. That's not for my life, in that I'm not personally a blade sports master, but I am a watcher and enjoyer of blade sports. There are a couple ones coming up. JG doesn't like, people giving stuff away, so I'm not going to name them. But there are a couple coming up that are kind of directly lifted from moments and events in my life. Um, but one thing I do want to mention is that the luau dance that Mordecai and Rigby do in Skip's luau is something that I did in the writer's room. I think what happened was that we got fixed that tape. The premise was approved by the network, and I believe I was so excited that we'd be getting to start with this episode, this unusual episode that Mordecai and Rigby aren't in, that I clapped and I broke into this luau dance in the room, and so that made its way into the show as a result. So that's kind of a small recent example, but honestly, it's like one of the things about a board-driven show is that you're constantly mining from your own life to find moments that feel real and true, and so that's just something that's happening every day.
When I spoke to Maddie, she did say that it was made very clear that they had to do like the luau dance in that episode.
Yeah. Yep, it was in the outline. It was everything. I don't know if I think, in fact, at the handout for that episode, I was asked to demonstrate the dance for them so that they could reference it in the episode. And it's just like you're always trying to find, even early in the season, you're always just trying to find moments that are real to put in there that are funny. And so a lot of the stuff that we came up with in that writer's room just came from jokes, came from us just like talking about life, talking about moments in our lives and making things happen like that.
We'll talk quite a bit more about Lost Tapes. So you finished regular show 2015.
Mhm.
All these years later, suddenly regular show is coming back. What was that like? How did you find out? How did you get the call, as it were?
Well, I knew it was going to happen. I saw it in the tea leaves. I saw the way that the winds were flowing, and I knew. I just knew without anyone telling me that it was going to happen. And I remember, you've probably seen photos from the big last day at the original Cartoon Network building, and where everybody got together to get a picture in front of the building. I remember I bumped into JG, and I was like, I have a feeling the show's coming back. And he was like, I'll let you know. And he, of course, knew that it was happening. And I found out a few months later, Sean told me, we were getting together and Sean was kind of like, yeah, we're working on something right now. Um, and it wasn't guaranteed yet. It was still in development or whatever, but he let us know that they were having conversations. Um, And so when I got the call to come join, it wasn't a surprise at all. And I was excited. I think that like uh, at that time, I think a lot of us who had left the show or had left the show during Close Enough or something like that, I think a lot of us were ready to come back. I think I was in the mood. And I would even when I was working on other jobs, I would even just think about like because boarding on the show had become such second nature for me. I would even think about like, oh, you could throw me in a regular show outline right now, and I could crank out a board, and it would be fun. You know. And so I was ready, and I was excited. And so, yeah, that was kind of how I felt. I kind of knew it was going to happen. I just had a feeling based on kind of the way things were going in the industry. And yeah, I was happy to do it.
You're also the first of the supervising directors that we've interviewed. So, just for anybody out there that isn't aware, what does that role entail?
Well, to be honest, on these board-driven shows, a role like supervising director can mean a lot of different things. On some shows, it means you're the number three guy and you see the episodes through to the end. On some shows, it means you're really, really focused specifically on like taking the episode from board through to animatic. It changes a lot from show to show. On this show in particular, what it meant was in the writers' room, generating the stories with the writers, handing out to the board artists, giving notes to the board artists alongside JG and Sean and the writers. Then I get the board and I'm working on the board and getting the board ready for animatic and doing notes of my own that I want to do, working with the revisionists to finish and plus up and clean up and work on the episodes, doing network notes, things like that. And very, very much a board centric job. And so this was a unique perspective. It was kind of like being supervising director slash like a storyboard supervisor. And so it was very board centric. It was writing in boards. It's kind of the nature of the job that I did on Lost Tapes.
What was it kind of like being in the writers' room now? Because it's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum from the writing that you were doing previously.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, it's being in the room with JG and Sean and Matt and Minty and Michelle. These are all people I really love hanging out with, and so a lot of the time it was just a lot of fun coming together and trying to come up with funny and interesting stuff. And one thing that I learned, about the way that regular show is made, I think a lot of people watch the show and they assume that it's easy to come up with these silly stories. And I remember when I entered the writer's room, I'd worked in the show for a really long time. And I kind of thought I had an idea of how these are built, right? And I came in with 10 of the wackiest, craziest, most interesting, like gimmick premises and magical elements and surreal ideas. And what I found in the writer's room is that a wacky or weird idea without a emotional core justifying it, or a character story justifying it doesn't really get anywhere in that room. Like it's a pretty big concern making sure that the stories come from a relatable, real, or character-driven place, and having the magical element grow from that in a way that feels natural. So that was the main thing that I learned is like, oh yeah, there's like a very substantial interest in character, and making sure the characters feel real and like themselves, and that the things that are happening feel like things that they would really say and do, and everything flows from that naturally. Um, and so I learned a lot. It's funny. I was in the writer's room for 5 years on KO, building stories there. I'd done all these different jobs and all these different shows, and it was almost a surprise how much that I still had to learn coming back to a show that I had already been on for 5 years and done 40 episodes of. So I loved being in the writers' room on Lost Tapes.
And one thing I'm curious about, and I might be completely wrong on this, but the episode Fix That Tape, was that scripted as opposed to being storyboard driven?
Yeah, that was a unique case where we were waiting for Hillary and Maddie to be available. They were not available yet. Maddie was finishing up on Among Us at the time, and so we pulled together the amazing talent of Calvin and City Lou. Calvin was just ramping up on Superman Magic Academy at the time, And if I remember correctly, um, the first half, there was an outline, and I believe the first half was scripted by me and JG and Sean. The three of us all worked on the script for the first half of the episode. And so if I remember correctly, the way that worked is we each picked up a third of that first half and we just wrote a few pages and got it together. And then I wrote the entire first half just as an exercise. I was just like, but we mostly just used the from the section that I handed in. And so it was a massive like collaboration of all of us getting together to make this first episode happen. And then Calvin did that second half a bit more traditionally board driven. Like he added jokes like the oh my God, those old timey lollipops, stuff like that. That's like pure Calvin. And so it was a kind of a strange melange of like all these different people coming together to work on the episode. So yeah, there was a scripted element to that first one. And then the other thing I'll note is that the episode, a lot of the episodes get a lot of love at the animatic stage. JG and Sean really love to embellish the episodes and plus them up at animatic, and Fix That Tape is certainly an example of that. In fact, the because it was running long, um, the whole opening sequence with Pops in the afterlife was something that was totally different in the original version, and that was something that JG added at the animatic stage. So that just goes to show like how these things come together. Yeah.
I'm really trying to wonder what it would have been like now without like that scene.
Well, I don't think I can explain because it involves some things that you might see later in the season. So I don't want to get into it too much, but we're still meeting Pops in the afterlife. It was just a different type of scene. And yeah, JG ended up doing a different thing that I thought was really cool. And then you end up with two licensed songs in one 22-minute opening, which is a very kind of laying it down type of like way of saying regular show is back.
Just on licensed songs, I mean, the first thing that I thought of is like this is the perfect song for Pops. Just really embodies his love of life. Um, and just honestly, I think the entire first episode was just I described it as 9 years of therapy condensed into like 11 minutes.
That's funny.
Especially just like a lot there's like a lot of like little things like you see Mr. Maylard in
Hmm.
the afterlife, which that shot of Mr. Maylard in the finale where he's crying because he realizes that Pops doesn't come back. That's like I feel like that's kind of been stuck in my mind all this time. So seeing him there, like reunited with him, was great, especially considering obviously David Ogden is no longer with us as well. It kind of also felt like a nice tribute to him.
He's one of a handful of major voice actors who passed away, and so we have to come up with solutions for how to do that. And so yeah, it meant a lot to me that who was there and where and how they appear. I felt it was important that we see Maylard, and I felt it was important that we see Anti-Pops. Because even though he doesn't have a large part in the story of that episode, if you're watching this right after watching the end of season 8, you're going to wonder what's going on with Anti-Pops. So it's like we got to make it clear. And then going through and picking out which regular show characters are there in this happy afterlife, like, that was like it took a good amount of time and energy to kind of make those choices and figure those things out. So it's fun to do. But yeah, Maylard, it's very sad that we've lost the voice actor for him, and it's also very sad that because of S&P, he can no longer have a pipe in his mouth. So that's tragic.
This can be either from the original series or the new series. Obviously, much more limited than the new series. But what are some of your favorite episodes that both you've done or that other people have worked on?
Well, when it comes to ones that I've done, we've talked about a lot of them. I really like TGI Tuesday. That's one of the first ones where I really felt like I was getting my bearings on the show and like really felt like I knew what I was doing. And Last Laserdisc as well. That was one where I got the outline, and I really felt like oh, this is an episode I was born to make. Sometimes you get an outline and you're like, this is a tremendous challenge. to make this funny and good. Like this is going to be an uphill battle. And sometimes you get an outline and it feels like a Christmas present, and that's definitely how I felt with Last Laserdisc. And I really liked I Like You High. That's like a very, very heartfelt, emotional one where, Owen and I worked on this third act where Mordecai gives this like monologue about these incredibly complicated emotions that a person is going through, and I ended up being quite proud of that episode. And then Billion Century Duck Crisis and Dome Experiment and Rigby's Graduation come to mind. And then as far as episodes that I didn't work on that I love, I'm gonna stump for Tants. I think Tants is one of the all-time great Pops episodes. I'm gonna stump for Real Date. I think that's an immensely funny episode. I'm always quoting it where it's just like, here's what I'm thinking. Break up with CJ. I think the couple corral guy is like so funny. I See Turtles I really like because it's an episode that like speaks to, well, it's a great Eileen episode, and I love the all the cops getting eaten by turtles. It's really amazing. And then also I just like that it's telling a thoughtful story about Eileen being caught in the middle of this whole like it's like a respite in the middle of this like storyline where it's like how does Eileen feel about it? And then beyond those, I will mention, Boba and Stiltwalkers are among my all-time favorite episodes of the show for sure.
I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you just said. I've said I think I said it in one of our standalone podcasts that I'm a huge lover of tents, uh, and that if tents were sold commercially, uh, I would buy about 10 pairs of them.
Yeah. I think, there are a lot of episodes of the show that are immensely funny and just like perfect that because they're like normal episodes, they don't get talked about as much. But I think Tance is one of the great like normal episodes of regular show. I also love Dawn. Dawn was the episode that made me fall in love with the show originally.
Going on to what you were saying about Eileen, just back onto the Lost Tapes, I'm loving the bit more of a focus we have on Eileen in some episodes. There's a lot of funny like Eileen isms in Corpse Flower.
The thing with Eileen is like, she's just as weird as everyone else. She's so funny. And it all started with the way Minty and Kat wrote Eileen in that very, very first episode, which was Do Me a Solid. I remember reading that board and being like, this is the funniest character in the world. And so it's always a pleasure to do stuff with Eileen. And honestly, to me, it's always a pleasure to do stuff with Margaret. I think that there are certain characters. I think Margaret and High Five Ghost, to me, came into their own late into the show. I think in season 7, we really started to zero in on how and why these characters are funny on their own. I think Local News Legend is a hilarious episode, and I love Margaret in that episode. I think she's hilarious. I love Margaret in Corpse Flower. I think she's hilarious, and Coffee Shop Wars as well. And then yeah, High Five Ghost. Like in season 7 when we did Dome Experiment, and we kind of added this whole thing where there's this weird thread where High Five Ghost becomes the boss, and that to me is like one of the moments where we really started to like come up with new ways to make High Five Ghost funny, or the Terror Tales where High Five Ghost is stuck in an elevator. I really love doing, and so he's actually maybe my favorite character to write at this point. But yeah, so it's been fun. Lots of Eileen and a lot more Margaret too, and just I was always in the writers' room with my like grand theories of why Margaret is funny and ways to make Margaret funny.
Yeah, I mean, again on Corpse Flower, the poem she gives at the end was great, and especially the delivery that JD gave to it.
Yep, yep, yep. Look, Margaret is normal. It's funny. It's funny how normal she is. I can't say too much, but there's another episode with Margaret in it coming up that I think is really great, which I think is a great showcase for her talents. So that's something for us all to look forward to.
You've basically just answered it already, but favorite characters to board or write for?
Yeah, High Five Ghost has become my favorite. These things shift over the years. Benson I loved for a long time. Eileen I always love. Mordecai and Rigby as a duo is really fun. But if I had to pick one, it would be High Five Ghost. I just really love giving him a one-off line that is just a strange, funny, specific, weird thing. There's a lot of that in Stuck by Lightning as well. So he's one I have a unique attachment to, I think.
Have you got a favorite High Five Ghost line?
I mean, some of them are to come, but I really like there's a whole thing in like Stuck by Lightning where he's just like, "Are we all alone on this big blue pebble?" And then there's also parts in the Stuck in the Elevator one where he's just like, "Oh wow, 10 flights. That's quite the hike." Little observational things like that. Or the part where he's freaking out that he's gonna die, and he's like, "I don't want to. Oh no, I don't want to. I'm not. I didn't complete my student loans. I don't want to burden my family." He's concerned about his student loans as he's about to get killed. So those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I've often said, I don't know if it's because maybe I feel like I relate to High Five Ghost the most,
Hmm.
but I've always said like, oh yeah, he's my. It's hard picking a favorite character. I'm a huge High Five Ghost lover, and the other thing is with this plush, I don't actually have much shame in saying this. I paid a lot of money to get this, because obviously they're discontinued now,
Yep.
and have been for years. But my biggest regret was that I didn't get a High Five Ghost plush when they were being made. So I ended up going on eBay, and I think I paid equivalent to about $200 to get it. But
Look, we all have things we all have things we need in life. And the thing with the High Five Ghost plush is also that it looks good. Like it looks like the character. It's
which is
really nice.
nice,
Yeah.
considering some of the other. I mean, you definitely know you bought it a whole episode on that.
Yeah, the High Five Ghost is one of the better ones, and I also have that one. I got it a lot earlier, luckily, so I don't have to. I have a couple like slightly rare pieces of regular show merch. I've got the remote control golf cart as well, and I don't know if that goes for much or anything like that, but I know it was a very rare item.
That's the biggest shame, just in terms of like regular show merch, is that here in the UK, all of those figures and plushies we got like a year later. Um, and then I don't know if maybe like Jazz Morris weren't like they they no longer had the license, but we never got like the second wave of like regular show figures and stuff over here.
The second wave, I think, was a lot rarer. Like, I think it had skips with like the Fists of Justice. Like, I've got that toy, yeah, and I think it was just less common. I think it fizzled out pretty quick. I mean, I honestly believe, now that regular show is like a legacy IP, that they would probably do better now, putting out merch of the characters, and so I hope they do more of that. I like some of the stranger, more obscure regular show merch. Like, I have a shirt that's Muscle Man and Starla in their fancy restaurant outfits, and it just says, "You know who else likes Valentine's Day?" And I'm like, this has to be one of the most obscure regular show shirts in existence. And it's just fun, all the weird stuff they put out during the brief time that the show was being merchandised. Also, I'll just note, it was very strange that my first job ever was on a show that became like a household name where you could go to a normal store and see it, like what a unique and lucky experience, that the very first show I ever worked on ended up being something like that.
What I'd like to know, and again, this can be for both original and the current series, what are some of your favorite memories of working on the show?
Well, I've gathered from context clues that, this is an answer you often get, which is going to lunch with the crew. As the seasons went on, the board teams became very we really bonded a lot. And we had this thing called Casual Fridays, where every Friday we would go to a restaurant in the Burbank area that we normally wouldn't go to. So we'd go to like the Old Country Buffet or something like that, or something in the area that we had always driven by and never thought to go to. And we had so much fun doing that we started to just go all the time. Because by this point we really, really, really knew how to do the show inside and out. And so we could conceivably take a 90-minute lunch and come back and still hand in a great episode of the show. And we did. By this was, starting with like later seasons of the show that we worked on. And so that was a lot of fun. There's also just like weird stuff that would happen. Like one time I had a bowl of cereal from the cereal thing, and I just spilled it all over my desk and office, and then everybody just like watched me and laughed at that. And there was the time that, of course, that we got a Coca-Cola Freestyle machine installed, and Owen decided to try making the ultimate suicide with every single one of the flavors in the entire Coca-Cola Freestyle machine in one mix. Early days, I really loved going to Moore's. We would go to Moore's with the Adventure Time and Regular Show crew across the street. and we would watch both episodes air live. And I have a lot of memories of, for me as a fan, I started as a fan. I was the first like fan of the show who worked on the show, first person who watched the show to join the show. And those first few months, sitting in that Moore's room surrounded by the people making my favorite shows in the world, it was absolutely insane. Like just like being like, oh, I'm here. Like I couldn't believe it. And yeah, also some board artist friends and I, we went on a few like trips, which was a lot of fun. We took a trip to Arizona. We took a trip to either Arrowhead or Big Bear, I forget which one. We took a trip to Portland, and we would just go and like go on a trip together and have fun and eat food and so yeah, I mean I can't not say the friendships and the fun that we all had together. And then the other thing I'll mention is anytime that we got JG to laugh really, really, really hard. He will like hunch over if he's like really, really, really laughing hard. And I remember Calvin pulled that off in TGI Tuesday during the dance scene. And we also pulled that off in Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special with all that stuff. And like that's like very proud moments like that. And then the thing with Lost Tapes is it's kind of the same thing, like the fun is getting together with everybody and going and having a fun lunch. We have the Warner Brothers campus is a very different situation from the old Cartoon Network building, but it does have like a pretty large terrace with like places to eat outside. And so we all have like a favorite table to go to, and we all love getting together and eating at the table and stuff like that. And getting to spend time with all my favorite, people. So many people from the original show came back, and then a lot of great new people getting and hanging out with all those folks. Yeah, that's what comes to mind, I guess. There's a lot of just like fun camaraderie on the show.
I've said this before, but one of my favorite things just from back in the day was just casually, because I was one of those people who would follow all the board artists online, and just like seeing everyone hanging out, it was like, this seems like it's more than just a job.
I mean, yeah, it's rare that you are. I mean, one of the things about working on a show like this is like you're surrounded by people who are so good at what they do that it makes you want to be better. And every single day you're coming in and you're at someone else's board pitch and it makes you laugh so hard. And you're like, it's a privilege to even be here to see something this funny. And now I get to try to make my thing funnier to rise to this occasion. And, just so many nice, cool, funny people, as a result of, something I have to, that I sometimes mention in these interviews is like, when I started on the show and I moved to LA, I didn't know anyone who worked at Cartoon Network. How would I? I was coming from Minneapolis with no animation experience. I had a couple friends in LA and I was staying on their couch for the first couple weeks. And when I came to the office, though, it's me, like anyone else. I'm a socially awkward, like introverted artist or whatever. And I joined this show, and the regular show team is unbelievably welcoming to me and just letting me be part of the family on regular show, part of the group, Calvin and Drace and Benton and Kat and Sean and everyone. They were not standoffish. They weren't like anything like that. They were so welcoming of this new person with no experience coming onto the show. And it's a rare occasion that you enter a totally new social universe and you feel welcomed. And like so that starting on such a positive note where I really felt like supported by everyone around me really kind of set the tone for now, you know, what is it, 14, 15 years of this stuff. It's kind of unbelievable to think. I was talking with Drace about our first episode recently, and we were talking about Wing Kingdom because, Wing Kingdom became a pretty major part of the show. But how did it start? It started as just there's wing sauce mentioned in Under the Hood, and we need to come up with a restaurant name. And it was just like a 3-minute conversation between Drace and I, kind of going back and forth on different names. And okay, we landed on Wing Kingdom that day. And then now, over a decade later, it's like that wing, it's still there. Like it's kind of wild when you think about it like that.
And I mean, I feel like in a way, you could associate that with your progression from you just by chance saw a tweet from JG saying like looking for board artists, and now here you are like 15 years later as supervisor director Toby Jones.
I mean, yeah, if that tweet hadn't happened, if he hadn't made that tweet that day and I hadn't seen it, It's very likely I never would have even worked in the animation industry because there probably wouldn't have been any other show in the history of the world where the specific unique skill set and perspective that I had at that time was compatible and desired, you know. So it really is like the luck of that, of the timing of that, like it's kind of crazy to think about.
I'd like to ask who were some of your biggest inspirations to do the work that you do?
Well, I mean, aside from all of the aforementioned like peers, and artists who I've worked with on all the shows that I've done, everyone who I worked with on Regular Show and OKKO and even Shape Island and Jellystone. But then beyond that, over the last, 5, 10 years, I've increasingly gotten into the world of like outsider micro budget art and cinema in particular. And so filmmakers like Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh have really inspired me. And Aaron Wertheimer, who made a movie called Not If I See You First a couple of years ago, and even the world of like shot on video horror, shot on VHS, in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. People who are out there who don't have who I was very fortunate that I was able to work on a major show and I have access to all these resources to make a polished piece of art that people can understand. But these people who don't have those resources and get out there and make something outside the mainstream with no resources, that stuff really, really inspires me. And then in the last couple of years, there are some really cool pieces of art that have come out. There's this animated web series called Titanium Daydream. And again, that's just like a few people on their own. They're making this thing that's like such a unique creative vision. There's a game from last year that's like an FMV game called Blippo Plus that I would recommend to anyone. It's a simulation of an alien TV satellite network where you watch all the shows and go through a program guide. That inspired me to no end. Just the amount of creativity and like positivity on display. It's like a utopian vision of the world, and it has this like VHS aesthetic that's like so charming. And then another one I'll mention is there's a movie called Boys Go to Jupiter by this artist Julian Glander, who I know a little bit. We worked together on a couple little things, and he made this movie in Blender, on his own. And it's like that's the kind of stuff that really, really gets me excited. Like the more time I spend in the industry with access to these resources, the more interesting I find people who do things without that and like what they're able to do. And then yeah, I already mentioned all of my peers and coworkers, which there'd be too many to mention, but like it's hard not to feel inspired every day seeing what people are making.
Just go to the end of the any regular show episodes and just look at all the names in the credits.
Yes, any show that I've worked on, or look at the names, and because these are all the people who you know we're all better together. What can I say? Like that's what's so cool to experience working on these crews and working on these teams. That's right, the crews and teams. I said them as though they're two different things. Crews are good, teams are also good, and they're different from each other.
Well, do you have any advice for anybody out there who wants to break into the animation industry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you get an answer like this from a lot of folks, but it really is the whole thing of like, don't ask for permission, don't wait for someone to bless you with anything. You need to be out there expressing your creative voice all the time. And every single person has within them something so specific that no one else can do. And the more you hone that craft of making something that only you can do in a way that only you can do, the more likely it is that you will find the person who's been waiting for that. That's what happened with me on Regular Show. I was making these personal works, and it worked out that JG found that to be compatible, with what he's doing. And especially when you're not getting paid to do it, like there's no reason to try to make something normal, like you can be normal when they pay you. And then until they pay you, you should be making something radically that only you could do. Um, because we're all going to die someday. Like like what is the thing that only, yeah, so that's like, that I guess that's my main advice is just it's like, and you can make something with nothing. I talked about that earlier and what inspires me. It's like you can make something today, with what you have around you. That's a complete thought, and so that's something I really feel strongly about. And I think that I want to see more art from people who don't know that they can do it, and I think that a lot of interesting stuff comes from that. That ended up being a bit of a zigzagging thought, but hopefully it comes together with some degree of coherence. I don't know.
Unfortunately, we are heading towards the end of the interview now. But just before I let you go, I'd like to ask, is there anything that you've been working on or that's come out recently that you'd like to promote?
Sure. I mean, there are a good number of things. Like I would always say to watch OKKO Let's Be Heroes. I worked on that for 5 years after I worked on regular show, and I'm immensely proud of what we did on that show. So I would recommend seeking out OKKO Let's Be Heroes, and you could check out Jellystone and Shape Island, which I worked on, and there's the animated series Among Us. It's a really cool, really funny, really interesting, really smart show. And the other thing I have to plug is that I made a micro budget independent movie called AJ Goes to the Dog Park. And it's a surreal and absurdist gag driven comedy that's very, very micro budget. We shot it in Fargo, North Dakota with all by ourselves, with a cast and crew of friends and family. And I would be happy if you would check that out. So yeah, that's AJ Goes to the Dog Park, which we worked on for 3 years, shooting it over nights and weekends, and it finally came out, last year, and I would be happy if anyone would check that out. So that's several plugs for you there.
And where can people find you on social media?
I'm Toby Jones on everything, so you can find me on Blue Sky or Instagram, or whatever. There on Instagram, I do post Oreo reviews occasionally, which are another great form of artistic expression. And so, yeah, that's where you could find me.
Well, that's great. Toby, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you once again to Toby Jones for joining us for this interview. If you want to hear more about Toby's work, then make sure you follow him at Toby Jones across social media. All of his links will be in the description. Next time, we'll be speaking to Sam Lane, a storyboard artist for the new series, Regular Show The Lost Tapes. Here's a preview.
Outside of the work atmosphere itself, like we all just became friends and like hung out with each other. So like a weird fact of the show is that we all really love karaoke. So we would go to this place in Koreatown that was like an Egyptian themed karaoke spot and rent out a room and just like sing for 5 hours. Which is really funny because I think traditionally animators are like pretty shy and don't want to be the center of attention. But for whatever reason, karaoke seems to unlock this like beast inside of us all.